The American Mustang, an iconic symbol of American spirit. But what exactly is it costing us to keep these animals wild? I've been invested in the Mustang issue my entire life. I was a horse girl growing up, but I really got to see it firsthand last summer when I went to a ranch in Montana that was actually using these animals. And so I got to see what had to go into taking care of this amount of horses. It was a lot to take in. In this speech, I'm going to be talking about the current Mustang situation, including their impacts on environment, their competition with other animals, and their relationship to our society, including kind of how they're protected still. And you might ask, why is this relevant to you? The chances of you seeing a wild horse while driving along the highway are pretty low. But we're at a point in our society where we're able to look back at the decisions that we've made ecologically and kind of see the impacts that they've had long term. And so there may come a time when we have to redecide our decision to keep wild horses out in the West, and it's going to be up to us to be educated about it. So first, what is a Mustang? It turns out they're actually not wild horses. Released or escaped from the long descendants of Spanish colonizer horses, they are technically feral now. But the Mustang has become its own identifiable breed, just like a quarter horse or a thoroughbred in our modern society. They exist on BLM land, which is the Bureau of Land Management, and they control a lot of public land. So large swaths of land through most of the western states, Alaska, possibly even Hawaii, lands that are just under protection or under public control that need to be regulated a little bit more. And so this is a map of all the lands that BLM has control over. It's the dark green area, and so this is just kind of everything that they manage. It's all western United States. But this is not all available to wild horses. This is the land that is either allowed to have herds on it or is currently being used by wild herds. And so there are about 30 to 40,000 wild horses on this land roaming it as wild animals, and there's an additional 40,000 in long-term and short-term holding facilities and different conservation facilities as well. So, impacts on environment. What is 40,000 feral horses doing to the land out west? So they're not a natural part of their ecosystem. This here is a picture of Nevada, which has the most densely populated area of wild horses. And as you can see, there's not a lot of forage out there for horses and cattle and sheep and buffalo and whatever else may be wandering out there to really be competing for. So resources are scarce. In a 2017 article published by the Journal of Arid Environments, written by Amy Gooch and colleagues, titled "The Impact of Feral Horses on Pronghorn Behavior at Water Sources," goes into detail about how indigenous animals are actually changing their behaviors in the presence of wild horses. And so this is the pronghorn. It's actually an antelope native to North America. And so these guys are feeling the pressure of what they call non-predators. So because they're not actually being hunted by wild horses, but their behaviors are still being changed. And so the impacts are vast. So not only this, but wild horses compete with our beef industry. So a lot of large ranches are grazing cattle or sheep out on public lands, the BLM land. And so when you overpopulate an area, grass a lot of times doesn't come back from being compacted down from all the animals walking on it. And so in an article in 2005 titled "A New Range War," published in Newsweek and written by Andrew Muir, talks about this battle for limited resources. From water to grass to space, these wild horses are causing a lot of problems. And it's not as simple either as just taking horses off the range. Their populations are really difficult to control. They can double every 4 years. And so trying to keep in control this vastly populating species is really, really complicated. And so in an article titled "Given Free Rein, Prolific Mustangs Gallop into Trouble," written by John Turner Jr. and initially published in 1984, describes a lot of the methods that they've used since publication. So currently they're using dart guns to inject stallions with anti-fertilization drugs. And so this is one way that they're to keep populations down. And so the results were positive. They did have less foals, but the drug only lasts one breeding season. So in order to get enough people, enough darts, enough guns out there to dart every single stallion, or enough that we need in order to make a difference every single breeding season, is getting a little costly, and it's kind of rivaling the cost of the long-term holding facilities and the roundups that they're doing. So it's complicated. But they're under protection, so we're going through all this trouble so as not to kill the wild horses. But even so, we still are. In a 2010 article published in the New York Times titled "Nevada Horses Die in Roundup," discusses the fatal abuse and the mismanagement of horses in long-term and short-term facilities. So they use helicopters, quads, anything to round these horses up, and a lot of injury can come from running at these speeds because they're not used to being handled, and then while they're in the facility, they're compacted with a lot of horses, a lot of herds. So these are highly territorial animals, and so there's fighting, there's aggression. It's just kind of a really complicated situation to shove all these horses together. And so even though we keep putting laws into effect to protect these animals, we're still killing them, just indirectly. So moving on to my next point about the relationship to our society, the idealized image of America comes from our westward expansion days. And so this is a picture of the Man from Snowy River, which I think kind of embodies that kind of Western spirit, manifest destiny, sea to shining sea kind of mentality. And so that's what these wild horses embody. And so they're a prominent feature in this image, and under almost every single law of protection that has gone into effect since 1971, a lot of federal legislators state that the American Mustang is a symbol of the American spirit, and this is why they're going under protection. And so this has a lot of profound effects even today. So the lingering ideation continues to affect our legislation. In an article titled "House Bill Would Ban Euthanization of Wild Horses," written by James Lewis in 2009 and published in the DVM, the news magazine of veterinary medicine, discusses a current issue about wild horses in the West and how legislature is going into effect that is really pushed by this ideation. And so, to recap, Mustangs are not an indigenous species. They're feral, and they're not wild, and they don't belong in the United States. And so the problems continue to persist. So from environment to competition with our beef industry, our sheep industry, they're continuing to cause problems that we're not able to solve with our current legislature. So I need to ask you, what do you think the decision should be about keeping wild horses in the West? Thank you.